Hello everybody, welcome back to the channel. This is MTG Ghoul Dude. Today we're going to be continuing our Digging Up the Past of Dragon series, starting out with Modern Horizons 1. So as we've been going through, I've been slowly collecting, finding the cards in my own collection to build my own dragon deck. So eventually, hopefully before this whole series is done, I'll have a dragon deck to show off. But nevertheless, let's go on ahead and get into the dragons from Modern Horizons 1, starting out with the one and only Ore Scale Guardian. This is a very unique dragon to me because for 5 generic and 2 red, it's a 4/4, and it costs 1 less for each land card in your graveyard. And it has flying and haste. Now, maybe it's just me, but I actually think that in, I don't know, more landfall centered decks, that this would actually be pretty good. But then again, most of the time, if you're playing landfall and you're doing land based synergies, you're not looking for a 4/4 for maybe 3. But it's, in my opinion, this is actually still a pretty decent card. So now we're going to move into M20, and man, that is a crappy logo that I found. Ugh, sorry guys for that one. But nevertheless, we found a rapacious, I don't know how to pronounce that word. I'm from the South. I apologize. Dragon for 4 generic and a red. It's a 3/3 with flying. And when it enters the battlefield, you create 2 treasure tokens. This actually made it into the dragon deck because, you know, if it gets any cheaper, you get 2 treasures, and it's 3/3. It's pretty good to me. Moving on to Dracoseth, Maw of Flames for 4 generic and 3 red. This is a 7/7 with flying. When it attacks, it deals 4 damage to any target and 3 damage to each of up to 2 other targets. So 4 damage to 1 and spread 3 to 2 between 2. So it's actually pretty good to me. Mind you, it doesn't say different, so you could just dome somebody for 7. That's not bad. Up to 2 other targets. Maybe, I don't know. It just seems like a good idea though. And now we're going to move into Eldraine with the Lock Dragon for 4 hybrid blue and red mana. It's a 3/2 with flying. When it enters the battlefield or attacks, you may discard a card. If you do, you draw a card. So you just loot if it attacks, which is, you know, it couldn't be bad. And we have been getting some blue dragons, like the Shimmer Dragon. And I just love this art. Maybe it's just me, but I just feel like this dragon is the happiest dragon in the world because he's got his own castle. He has grown. He has overgrown his little horde cave, and he is taking over this castle. I thought that was pretty cool. And for 4 generic and 2 blue, it's a 5/6 with flying, and as long as you control 4 or more artifacts, it has hexproof. Then you can tap 2 untapped artifacts you control to draw a card. So tap them treasures you don't need right now, draw a card. Opportunistic Dragon for 2 generic and 2 red. This is a 4/3 with flying, and whenever it enters the battlefield, choose target human or artifact an opponent controls. For as long as you control, well, as long as Opportunistic Dragon remains on the battlefield, gain control of that permanent, it loses all abilities, and it can't attack or block. So you gain, I don't know, you steal somebody's, what is the Phyrexia card? Portal to Phyrexia. It doesn't do anything. It loses all abilities. I mean, it could just stall the board, you know, keep that one person from having it, which is not a bad idea. And this is probably the apex of all dragon decks. I mean, you know, Dragon still has his followers, but and Tiamat is coming in close second, but I feel like Corvold is probably the biggest bad of all dragons right now. Until we get something that's a little bit more broken, Corvold is probably going to be the best for a while. But let's talk a little bit about Corvold. Corvold, the Fey Cursed King. For 2 generic, a black, a red, and a green, it's a 4/4 with flying. When it enters the battlefield or attacks, sacrifice another permanent. And for decks that he commands, you get to sacrifice a permanent. And when you sacrifice a permanent, you put a +1/+1 counter on him and you draw a card. So this leans heavy into aristocrats. I personally built mine as goblins because you can always nom the goblins. There's never an end to the goblins. So that's what I built my Corvold deck around. And now we're going to move into Theros Beyond Death with the singular Terror of Mount Velus. Velus? I don't know how to pronounce that. But for 5 generic and 2 red, it's 5/5 with flying and double strike. When it enters the battlefield, and this is the kick, this is probably a heck of a dragon if you're going to use it for, this ability. And if you could actually blink it, this actually gets a lot better. Creatures you control gain double strike until end of turn. Yeah, that's for 5 generic and a red, 2 red. It's a hefty price to pay for a 5/5 with flying and double strike, but it's still pretty good in my opinion. And now we're going to move into Ikoria with Sprite Dragon for it's a cute little 1/1 for a blue and a red with flying and haste. Whenever you cast a non-creature spell, he gets a counter. He gets a little bit bigger. It's adorable. And it looks like he's got 2 sets of eyes. That's kind of wild right there. Moving into M21, we have a few bangers. Unfortunately, Hellkite Punisher isn't one of them because for 5 generic and 2 red, it's a 6/6 with flying and it has fire breathing. What we really want to talk about is Gadrak the Suncrowned for 2 generic and a red, just 3 for a 5/4 with flying. It can't attack unless you control 4 or more artifacts. At the beginning of your end step, create a treasure token for each non-token creature that died this turn. So in a way, this is kind of like a, what is the best way to put this? It's a red black market, pretty much. I mean, it's still pretty cool as long as it's non-token, a non-token creature. And then we have Terror of the Peaks. This is probably one of my favorite dragons because it just makes you regret going up against a dragon deck if they're able to cast more than one spell, or if they make tokens. Yep, dragons, any creature. For 3 generic and 2 red, it's a 5/4 with flying. Spells your opponents cast that target Terror of the Peak cost an additional 3 life to cast. Now, in Commander, 3 life isn't that bad. I mean, it is what it is. Especially if you start out at 40 and you get this out fast, they're more than likely going to be trying to take this out fast. But the ability that we all love and know, whenever another creature enters the battlefield under your control, Terror of the Peaks itself deals damage equal to that creature's power to any target. So the running theme that I'm going to have in my dragon deck is I'm going to have a Basilisk Collar in the deck. Because I want to be able to, all right, that's just a 1/1, but we're still killing that creature. I'm not going to have to worry about any of the creatures, unless they're indestructible, or hexproof or shrouded, that I can't kill at any point in time. And now we're going to move into Zendikar with the very lonely Leyline Tyrant. But he won't be lonely because he's going to be hoarding your mana. Because for 2 generic and 2 red, it's a 4/4 with flying, and you don't lose unspent red mana as steps and phases end. When it dies, you may pay any amount of red, and when you do, it deals that much damage to any target. So, it's still pretty cool. Now we're going to move into Kaldheim with the Emerstem Predator. And believe it or not, the mouth on this creature is open. So it's coming to nom on you. It's coming to get you. For 2 generic, a black and a red, it's a 3/3 with flying. Whenever it becomes tapped, exile up to one target card from a graveyard and put a counter on the predator. Sacrifice another creature. It gains indestructible until end of turn, and you have to tap it. Goldspan Dragon. For 3 generic, 2 red, it is a mythic 4/4 flying and haste. Whenever it attacks or becomes the target of a spell, create a treasure. And treasures you control have tap, sacrifice this artifact, add 2 mana of any one color. And I just think this is the just most adorable little dragon. Just look at his little nose and his little horns and his wings. To note, he has 2 sets of wings, which is very odd for a dragon. But this is, Kaldheim. Other planes will see dragons differently. There's nothing wrong with that. And now we're going to move into Strixhaven and the very, 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 very eloquent Elder Dragon cycle that we have had presented to us. We're going to start off with Beledros Witherbloom. For 5 generic, a black and a green, it's a 4/4 with flying. At the beginning of your upkeep, of each upkeep, not just yours, create a 1/1 black and green pest creature token with, when this creature dies, you gain a life. And then you can pay 10 life and untap all lands you control. You activate it only once each turn. So if you're playing in a big pod like I usually do, Beledros could usually net you 10 creatures by the time you get around, and then you can just sacrifice them to gain the life and then untap all your lands again. Could actually work out pretty well in a bigger pod. Galazeth Prismari for 2 generic, a blue and a red. It's a 3/4 with flying. When it enters the battlefield, create a treasure. Artifacts you control have tap, add 1 mana of any color, spend this mana only to cast an instant or sorcery spell. It's not bad. Shadrick's Silverquill. For 3 generic, a white and a black. It's a 2/5 with flying and double strike, which is very odd for white and black. Because double strike is usually on like red. But let's continue. At the beginning of combat on your turn, you may choose 2. Each mode must target a different player. Mode 1, target player creates a 2/1 white-black Inkling creature token with flying. Mode 2 is target player draws a card and loses a life. In Mode 3 is target player puts a +1/+1 counter on each creature they control. So I can almost tell you every single time that if you're going to use the first option, that could almost always be put to somebody else. Give somebody else a flyer, because you're always going to be the one to draw the card or put the counters on your creatures. Unless you're in a good politicking mood, where if you wanted to do something different with this deck, with this creature as the commander, you could do like a politics deck, or like a group hug deck, or a group slug deck. It is what it is. I'm not going to blame you for what you do. Tanazar Quandrix. For 3 generic, a green and a blue. It's a 4/4 with flying and trample. And all of these are Elder Dragons, so we're not worried about, I feel like all these dragons would be just, I don't know how long Strixhaven has been a thing. Apparently it's a very old school. But I don't think that these Elder Dragons have anything on like Ugin or Nicol Bolas. You know what I'm saying? I feel like these are just like kids to them. But Tanazar has flying and trample. When it enters the battlefield, double the number of +1/+1 counters on target creature you control. This is pretty good. Whenever it attacks, you may have the base power and toughness of other creatures you control become equal to Tanazar Quandrix's power and toughness until end of turn. So it's kind of like an overrun effect. Can we agree on that? Because I mean, if it's a base 4/4, and you don't do anything else, it's just an overrun. No, their base power and toughness of other creatures become 4/4. So you really just want to buff him up as hard as you can. Yeah, that's pretty odd. That's not as good as I thought it was. Villamachus Lorehold. This is the creature I have chosen for the backdrop and for the video thumbnail. Because I wanted to build a Villamachus deck because I really like the concept of what he does. So Villamachus Lorehold for 5 generic, a red and a white. It's a 5/5 with flying, vigilance, and haste. Whenever he attacks, look at the top 7 of your library. He may cast an instant or sorcery spell with mana value less than or equal to its power from among them without paying its mana cost. Put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. Yep, that seems like a pretty good concept. I seen a gameplay not too probably yesterday that somebody played a Villamachus deck that went off, and it was amazing. It was pretty cool. He had combat tricks and everything. It was pretty neat. And finally, we're going to find ourselves in Modern Horizons 2, starting off with the Scion of Draco. Because for 12 generic mana, it's a 4/4. But it has the Domain ability. And its ability is this spell costs 2 less to cast for each basic land type among lands you control. Seems pretty good. So if you have all 5, that's 10. So it's a 2 drop at that point. A 2 drop 4/4 with flying. And each creature you control has vigilance if it's white, hexproof if it's blue, lifelink if it's black, first strike if it's red, and trample if it's green. This could actually be a really cool commander if it had all 5 colors. And it wasn't a generic creature, and if it was legendary. Timeless Dragon for 3 generic and 2 white. It's a 5/5 with flying and 2 abilities. Plane cycling. You can discard it, find a planes. And Eternalize. So you can cycle it away for 2 for a planes. And then you can use that planes to Eternalize it and make a 4/4 black zombie with no mana cost. But it just has flying other than that. Murktide Regent, 5 generic and 2 blue. It's a 3/3 with Delve. And this is a modern powerhouse. It may not be as strong as it used to be, but it's still a good card. It has flying and enters the battlefield with a +1/+1 counter on it for each instant or sorcery exiled with it. Should have said exiled to cast it. Or exiled. Yeah. Delved away to it. Something like that instead of exiled with it. Whenever an instant or sorcery card leaves your graveyard, put a +1/+1 counter on Murktide Regent. And what's unique is this is not legendary, so you can have multiple Murktides, and they all get bigger. Arcbound Whelp. For 3 generic and a red, it's a 0/0 with flying. It's an artifact creature. For a single red, it gets +1/+0 until an turn, and it has the ability Modular. So when it dies, you move 2 counters onto another target artifact creature. Obsidian Charmaw for 3 generic and 2 red. It's a 4/4, and the spell costs 1 less for each land your opponents control that produce colorless. So in a big game, this is a 4/4 for 2. And when it enters the battlefield, destroy target non-basic land an opponent controls. So say goodbye. If you're playing Commander, say goodbye to your Maze of Ith. If you're playing Modern, say goodbye to your Dark Depths. Pretty plain and simple. And finally, we have Piru, the Volatile, for 2 generic, 2 red, 2 white, and 2 black. It is a 7/7 legendary creature, Elder Dragon. I don't remember this Elder Dragon, but, you know, for any Vorthos people out there, let me know down in the comments below the story of Piru. Or Peru. I don't know how to pronounce that. They have flying and lifelink. At the beginning of your upkeep, sacrifice Piru the Volatile unless you pay red, white, black. So he's very reminiscent of the old legends, like Nicol Bolas. Whenever you cast him, you have to pay the blue, black, red to keep him on the battlefield. And when he dies, he deals 7 damage to each non-legendary creature. So this could actually be a very good legendary dragon creature deck or a legendary creature deck. Who knows? But that is going to be it for today, everybody. I really appreciate everybody that has stuck with me as we go through all these different dragons. And let me tell you, these next couple videos are going to be probably some 30-minute videos because next couple sets are really jam-packed with some dragons. But that's going to be it for today. And I'll see you guys next time in the graveyard.